Good morning again. So it is a special pleasure for me to be back this morning to introduce our honored guest and the conference's keynote speaker, His Excellency Dr. Abubakar Bukola Saraki, President of the Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Now in his second term, representing Kwara Central, Dr. Saraki is widely admired for advancing programs related to healthcare, power generation, farming, and infrastructure. A key part of the current legislative agenda in Nigeria is improving business in the country, and Dr. Saraki has directed a comprehensive review of business-related legislation in Nigeria, which is now underway. Dr. Saraki himself represents not just exceptional leadership in the country, but the dynamism of business in Nigeria that is becoming fully integrated into value chains in the global economy. These are far beyond oil and range from research and development to manufacturing to agriculture to entertainment. Please join me in extending our thanks and our warmest welcome to His Excellency Dr. Abubakar Bukola Saraki. Thank you.
Thank you so much, my fellow colleagues that are with me, fellow senators from the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the deans and students of this great university, Georgetown, the business faculty, and those who are here this morning. Let me say a very good morning to you all. It's a great pleasure for me to be here this morning. My last time in Georgetown University was actually about 4 years ago. I was trying to convince my son to come to Georgetown. So we walked around, I think, for an hour and a half. I thought it was going to be an easy, because I'm used to being in the UK universities. So when you tour universities, you can tour the entire university in half an hour. It turned out to be a workout for me, going around and seeing all the institutions. So it's great to be back. I'm still working on my son, unfortunately, went to London School of Economics. So I'm still working on the other two. Maybe after today I might be, and I'll be more fitter to be able to go around. It's a great pleasure to be here this morning. Let me start by thanking the organizers of the Georgetown African Business Conference for this opportunity to be part of this conversation, which I see as crucial to the social and economic development of Africa. My thanks to Banzi Nadia Ilunga, the GTABC Head of Content, for inviting me to deliver this keynote address on African value chain, harnessing local content and opportunity. It was important for me to come and share ideas with like minds, not because Georgetown's active promotion of dialogue across communities, as well as its fostering of greater understanding in the world, has become very crucial, very central to achieving peace and development in today's world. Permit me to observe that our gathering is in some way a reflection of the changing attitude towards the continent. It used to be the case when those in the West thought of Africa in the words of images of conflict, epidemics, and despots. While we still have reports of conflicts and outbreak of disease on CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, we also now have programs like Inside Africa, Africa Voices, Marketplace Africa, and Africa Business Report that showcase entrepreneurial acuity, talent, and innovation. Some of us can still recall, with the obligatory shaking of the head, the cover story of The Economist of March 11, 2000, with the title, Hopeless Africa, in which the magazine concluded that for reasons rooted in our culture, Africans cannot escape conflict, corruption, and disease. But remarkably, a decade later, the same magazine carried out another cover story, this time in December 3, 2011 edition, with a bolder header. It said, the hopeful continent, Africa rising. In an apparent volte-face, this ever-present phrase, Africa rising, has been with us since. Another interesting dimension to the African rising narrative is that much of what is celebrated as economic growth on the continent was in fact serendipitous. Because much of Africa still relies on commodity exports, we're able to make a connection between its economic growth and the rise in global commodity price rather than any new thinking or deliberate planning. I tend to align with those who reject this notion of Africa as a piggybacker on global economy as rather simplistic, especially given the remarkable political and social transformation that the continent has undergone by the end of last century. Democratization and the more accountable governance system that comes with it promote a way of thinking and doing things, which in turn create more conducive environment for business and investment. It was hardly a coincidence, therefore, that the African rising mantra emerged about the time that most of all African countries had embraced constitutional democracy as the only legitimate form of government. I believe, however, that this kind of skepticism is healthy. It forces us to continue to integrate the markers of our growth, what it means, what policy options it places before us, and what choices we must make if economic development is to yield real dividends for the people and address the social and economic challenges that we face. That said, there are many indicators that assure us of the possibilities of taking Africa business prospects to the next level. But that is, if we can grab and maximize the opportunities. This conference is therefore much in the moment. The IMF has also reported an annual growth rate of 7% for 10 African countries, including countries like Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Mozambique, that only recently suffered the trauma and conflicts of natural disasters. However, the grim reality is that about the time that my country was celebrating itself as the largest economy on the continent, with a GDP of 509 billion, the combined GDP of all the 54 African countries was almost equal to that of India alone. And it's important to note that only about 100,000 individuals account for 80% of Africa's GDP. The GDP of the 46 sub-Saharan Africa, including South Africa, is about the same of Belgium or even Chicago. Our share of global trade still hovers around 3%, and Africa is only able to attract 5% of global FDI. This is not to say that we've not made progress, but I see this as opportunities yet that are available. The point here, however, is that in the context of the overall global economy, this progress amounts to very little or nothing. This is why it matters very much that economic development must not be something that happens to Africa. It must be something that's envisioned and deliberately planned to reflect the African worldview and the African condition. It must be that which puts our people at the very center of our development agenda, both as agents and agencies. It must be that which responsibly exploits and harnesses African resources to the benefit of the majority of our people, especially the youth. Africa is home to about 1.3 billion people, and our population is expected to double by 2050, a mere 3 decades away. More than half of this will be between ages of 18 and 35. These has been described as a great demographic opportunity that is unique to Africa. While the average age in Europe is 45, for Africa, the scale tips to the side of 20-somethings. A large, huge population such as ours means a huge market in terms of consumption, services, and labor. However, for Africa to benefit from the demographic dividends that a massive youth population offers, we must make the right investment in quality higher education and create the right conditions and opportunities for entrepreneurship and employment. No African country can do this alone. A large market is only useful when the people have the necessary purchasing power. A huge population is only an asset when it's productive. My country, Nigeria, is already a population powerhouse. the largest in Africa and the 7th in the world. Our population stands at 180 million and has been rising at a rate of 2.7% since 2010. The UN predicts that Nigeria will close in on 300 million people mark by the year 2050, overtaking the United States and becoming the 3rd most populous country on the earth. Now, while it seems everyone in Nigeria, or even outside Nigeria, even I'm sure this audience here today, views oil as a focus, this is actually not true. Oil accounts for less than 15% of our GDP. Nigeria's true asset, and Nigeria's future asset, is its teeming population, or with the youth demographic is surging forward. The anticipated youth-driven economic growth will be unprecedented and unbeatable. But it will only happen if we can harness the latent talent of the growing population. The golden population of the youth will fulfill its destiny for the benefit of Nigeria and the world at large, only if it's empowered, educated, better skilled, and better prepared for the opportunities ahead. Speaking of the present time, as I said, Africa's share of global trade is still very low and still able to only attract 5% of FDI. A large population provides opportunities, as I said, for a large market. The president of the African Development Bank said, if Africa has the youngest population, what do we do with the youth and how do we develop their capacity to unlock their entrepreneurship? How does Africa take advantage of this diversity? We should be asking ourselves whether government and private sector can hire the exponentially increased number by African youth by 2050. They're rising, they're hungry for success, and they want success, and they want that success to make an impeccable impact on the communities. All we as policy makers need to do is provide them with an enabling environment, the tools and skills needed. At the 52nd annual meeting of the AGB in India, it said Africa needs to push for accelerated development for harnessing local resources to boost entrepreneurship and drive its industrialization. What does this tell us? Big businesses are all very well, but the survival depends on a good spread of micro, small, and medium enterprises. Not only do SMMEs serve as good source of raw material, they also critically as incubation centers for technology development. And as a clincher, SMEs are run by indigenous people, the local talent and opportunities we're seeking to harness. It is important, therefore, that African governments at all levels identify the ideas of comparative advantage and build on them. In agriculture, governments are becoming more attuned to the need to develop the value chain along the entire industry. Agropolitan development strategy is now part of sectoral lexicon. This simply refers to a strategy that provides multiple opportunities in agriculture and agro-businesses, with emphasis on the localization of the entire value chain, namely plant, process, store, package, market, and sell. This is to ensure that Africans are fully involved in the agricultural value chain. When we look at Nigeria, which is seeking to diversify its revenue base from our over-reliance on oil, it becomes apparent that we're not even close to tapping the agricultural value chain to a substantial degree. Available statistics show that the country is currently producing below recommended quantities. And I'll give some example. Take dairy products. Nigeria spends about $480 million annually on milk importation. Local production only accounts for 34% of our needs. That is 1.4 million tons. And that comes to an average of 10 liters per person per capita. This is in comparison to global averages of 40 liters per person. I'm sure here in Georgetown it's probably 60 liters per person. When we come to Africa, the average is 28 liters. Sadly, Nigeria is the lowest on the milk food chain. Of our estimated 20 million cattle population, only 2.3 are used to produce dairy. If you go to poultry, another example, our consumption per capita in Nigeria is 1.41 kilogram per person. Yet, and of course, we consume 1.2 million tons of chicken annually, of which, unfortunately, 900,000 of that is smuggled and imported in. Of our 1.4 kilograms per person, we're only a poor second to Ghana. I think the chairman is from Ghana. They consume more chicken there. It's 7.6 kilos per capita. You can see it's better built than some of them. South Africa stands at 32.98 per capita, while Brazil and the United States are 42 kilograms and 46 kilograms per capita. So we can see another example of the huge potential there. I give an example of rice, which is one of the most talked food items in Nigeria. In Nigeria, we consume 5 million metric tons of rice annually, of which we import 2.1 million tons. We're the second largest importer of rice in the world. And you wonder, why does a country of Nigeria need to import any ton of rice? It should be self-sufficient, and better still, it should be a supplier for the entire African continent. I've given some of these examples, but in my experience, when I was governor in my state a few years back, I had the opportunity in looking at opportunities, particularly in agriculture. And some of you must have heard of my experience, if you're not, where I invited Zimbabwe white farmers who were being thrown out by I mean to say ex-President Mugabe, who was driving the farmers out. And I invited them to Kwara, and the moment I did that, I became a persona non grata in Zimbabwe. Luckily, I didn't have any business to go and do in Zimbabwe. And the farmers came into Nigeria, and since then, I have seen where farmers who had experience of commercial farming are now working very closely with local farmers. And where in poultry, for example, you're seeing local farmers produce the soya and maize that are required for the chicken. You're seeing in the dairy sector the Fulani herdsmen who are producing milk that is being used for processing. And today, you're seeing, even in rice processing, you're seeing businesses like Dangote, for example, 5-10 years ago, would never have gone into agriculture and agro-allied. They're today going into agriculture and agro-allied. And I can predict that in the next 3-5 years, probably one of the largest rice producing, rice processing, would be Dangote in Nigeria. The point I'm making is that we're beginning to see where the plant, the process itself, you're beginning to get big conglomerate businesses, is no longer being left to subsistence farming. Is no longer being left to the 76-year-old man or woman in the rural areas who his education probably did not go beyond primary school or best secondary school. It's not being left to the old man who has no idea of how he can put up a business plan. What we're seeing today in agriculture is that young, energetic, enterprising, like yourselves, are looking at agriculture as a producer side of business. Agriculture is no longer a social event. It is being seen as a business venture. That is the future I see in the area of agriculture, not only in Nigeria, but in the continent. Like others have argued, there's really a need for us to devise an economic model that produces and manufactures primarily for African market and uses as a basis to engage and negotiate with the rest of the world. The value chain approach is based on the philosophy of comparative advantages and the economics of scale. Burdens and benefits are distributed to increase efficiency and productivity while adding value. 60% of African involvement in the global value chain is limited to supplying raw materials and inputs for other countries' export production. It's time, as I said, we recognize that efforts to create jobs and improve the economic condition of our people must mainstream agriculture in a way that underlines the value chain within Africa itself. Clearly, the global chain as exemplified in Factory Asia, which many Africans are active participants, can be replicated in our continent. But we can only be done if we're all prepared to embrace a new way of thinking about ourselves and the challenges we face and the possible solutions. Another sector that provides value addition and comparative advantage, and where we have seen progress and success over the last few years, is the entertainment industry, which has grown tremendously over the last 20 years, especially in Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, as our artists have risen from local champions to global recognition. Nigerian musicians such as Wizkid, who recently sold out at the London, I can see even the Dean knows Wizkid. Thank you. This would not have been the case 10 years ago. I would have said Wizkid and she would have said, who is that? Who have sold out London prestigious Royal Albert Hall, and who's been sought after for collaboration with major American music artists. I had the opportunity once to invite Wizkid round, and I asked him, and he said to me, he said, sir, even I am astonished. I was in Gabon, a French-speaking country, and I had a stadium of 40,000 filled to capacity, and my lyrics are in English, and all the people there were in French. They didn't understand my lyrics, but they were really dancing to it. That shows you how much we've moved. The Shoki dance movement from the back street of Lagos to Galaxy Heights in the music video of the US hip-hop artist, Missy Elliott. I remember in my younger days, well, it's not that far ago. You all went quiet. That's still, such a long time ago. If we went to a disco party in Nigeria, the DJ would play 100% American R&B from Shalamar, Earth, Wind and Fire. I think I'm giving away my age by this. I think I better stop. But now, my own kids, all they listen to is just Nigerian music. They don't listen to anything else. And I would never have thought in my lifetime that I would have seen this happen. The net resulting effect of that is that you're now seeing new artists, Nigerian artists coming up. You're now seeing a product going across Africa. You're seeing talents because you're seeing industries, studios, talents being developed. And more importantly, is that even inside of education, you're seeing opportunities. When we were growing up, it was either we were going to do law, medicine, or engineering. Now, there's a wide range of opportunities that's being created, and which there are opportunities, especially in the entertainment sector. The same can be said of Nollywood, which is the second largest movie industry. It's another bold example of people creating a value chain. Now you're seeing videos being developed, you're seeing films. If you go back to the first film, Living in Bondage, which was released in the mid-90s, to where we are now, where a lot of Nigerians, thousands of Nigerians have been employed. So influential as these stars, a news spread recently that a major Nollywood star has been cast in a small role in a Hollywood film, Marvel's Avengers Infinity War. Nigerians went, wow, it turned out to be fake news. But maybe we're onto something. Maybe Marvel Studios, if you're listening, if you want an audience of millions in Africa, you have your upcoming film, there's a casting decision you need to make. But talking about Nollywood is another good example today. I know in my house, my wife watches Nollywood. Initially, everybody was sort of sticking their nose not to be seen. But now it's so huge that everybody is watching Nollywood. And that's another sector as well that creates great opportunities. We hear of the Chinese building on the film industry. I think Africa too has great potential here. Same in fashion. Nigeria designers are now making major players on international. Apart from the PR benefits, the real economic terms, the fashion industry holds a huge potential for job creation within the continent. Studies have shown that, unfortunately, in the design, textile, accessories, that all these areas are still untapped at the moment. If we consider that in terms of mass sales, the African fashion designers are hardly exporting off-the-rack clothing items to the global market, we may reach the conclusion that other economics outside the continent are driving greater benefits than we are. Which is nice, and be nice to see us producing buttons and zippers in Africa for Africa fashion. That brings me also to the tech hubs of Yaba in Lagos and Nairobi in Kenya, the role of technology Naturally, a continent with a fast-growing population that enjoys music, movies, media, and content production are eager to play in order to stay abreast of information. And as such, the advent of apps and entertainment platforms, aided by strong broadband technology, spearheaded by young African investors, took the industry to exponential heights. In Lagos, for example, tech startups not only weathered the recession unscathed, they are attracting major seed funding, driving business opportunity, and impacting every value chain imaginable, from agriculture to blood banks. We cannot say it enough that Nigeria has some of the most talented, hardworking, and innovative young people in the world. This was much attested to by Mark Zuckerberg when he visited Nigeria some time ago. And he said, "I was highly impressed by the talents of youth in the co-creation hub in Yaba. I was blown away by their talent and their level of energy." You would never have imagined a few years back that a young chap like Mark Zuckerberg would come to Nigeria to visit and look at the potential in this sector. Something tells me that we have not scratched the surface of what the movie industry alone can contribute to the economy and entire Nigeria, African continent. All this will challenge us to plan and implement for the reaching reform that is ahead, especially higher education subsector, and to ensure that our youths are ready, market ready in the entire value chain. Nevertheless, the contribution of these new sectors like telecommunication, entertainment and retail have been great pointers to what's possible if policies were right and the general condition for investment is provided. Within 16 years of liberalization of our telecommunications sector in Nigeria, tel density has grown from less than 1% to 108%, making Nigeria one of the fastest growing telecommunications sectors in the world. The Nigeria Telecommunication Commission estimates the investment in that sector is now in excess of $68 billion and has contributed to 15 trillion to the Federation account. Most importantly, the sector has created growth, hundreds of careers for young entrepreneurs, and today is the fastest growing and largely now the second highest GDP contributor. The telecommunication economy is a clear evidence that in Nigeria, a huge market of population of 170, of which half of that is between the age of 15 and 35, it's a real golden opportunity for business. Perhaps we are yet to fully estimate how much direct and indirect impact this single revolution has had in developing other economic sectors like retail, business, commerce, etc. Nigeria, regardless of the challenges that may exist, the liberalization of the telecommunications sector in Nigeria has changed lives, created millionaires, and remain a proud symbol of what is possible on our continent if we get it right. However, while it's encouraging that 7 out of 10 Africans own a mobile phone, it's worth highlight the fact in Nigeria, for example, only 15.5 million own a smartphone, 23% of the population. Internet population is still less than half in the country at 46%, which translates to only 92 million. Be that as may, African governments have their role to play. African governments must provide an enabling environment to nurture this raw talent. Our education system needs to move away from a theory-based approach and paper certification to inculcating practical skills that will support entrepreneurship and boost innovation and industry. This is a place of vocational and technical education which provides youth to inculcate practical skills that will only not make them employable, but also make the continent in building an army of job providers. Without doubt, the vision and philosophy of the African Union is for a continent whose strength and prosperity are based on greater cooperation and partnership among our various countries and people. We're still far from realizing the full vision of the Union, but it is our view and our belief that some of the challenges that we see, particularly, for example, the Commonwealth Office study, said it's more cost efficient for Tanzania to trade in agriculture and manufacture goods with the United Kingdom and the United States than fellow African countries like Ghana or Botswana. These overall reports hold our hope for greater regional integration, highlighting some issues that we must address, There are infrastructure challenges. The existing tariff-based barriers significantly that hinder trading across region. In developing a regional value chain, it is critical that these barriers are removed because fragmented production processes involved in value chain production implies multiple border crossing. Free trade and interregional trade agreements are crucial in keeping tariffs low. Therefore, the quality as well as the absence of critical infrastructure across the continent is also key. As a result, many African countries are saddled with the highest trade cost on the planet. According to 2015 World Bank Ease of Doing Business, the cost of exporting a standard 20-foot container is more than 12 times higher in Chad, 6 times higher in Rwanda, and 3 times higher in South Africa than it is in China. Governance issues around the trading system can create significant encumbrances and add to cost. It is important that we find ways of making Africa a better place for doing business. In short, that the quality of African participation in the global value chain cannot improve unless we first achieve the development of the African value chain based on greater economic and social integration of Africa itself. Without the demonstrable commitment by African countries to think beyond their immediate borders, Africa will remain on the lower rung of the global production ladder, as our individual countries labor in vain to create conditions to enable participation in the global value chain. Let me emphasize that the exploitation of our continent does not become more acceptable simply because it is done by China, India, or Brazil. It is visionless leadership that strips our own country of local content or indigenization laws to benefit foreign investors, but in the impoverishment of our citizens. The opportunity to integrate into any value chain is fostered by the ease and the cost and reliability of international flow of services. It is heartening to know that some serious efforts are already going on in this direction. The Lagos to Tangiers Highway Project, the Trans-Sahara Gas Pipeline Project, as well as the Chinese-backed railway projects that will connect East African countries, are all remarkable in many respects. We now have fast trains running between India and Ethiopia and Djibouti, moving people and cargo. It has reduced journey of 3 days to just 8 hours. This is just an example. It is important to note, however, that infrastructure in Africa today is still largely financed by government, with limited private sector participation. Many of these infrastructures are therefore poorly managed. The massive upgrading of infrastructure that we need will also require us to develop a strengthening regulatory framework for procurement and public-private partnership in infrastructure development, in addition to developing capacity of relevant government agencies to manage this infrastructure. Perhaps in this line, the most remarkable progress in improving Africa interconnectivity so far was announced last week when 23 African countries at the last OAU meeting launched the Single Africa Air Transport Market. The International Air Transport Association, IATA, had earlier estimated that liberalizing air transport routes for only 12 African countries could create more than 150,000 jobs and boost the continent's GDP by $1.3 billion. We can therefore estimate that the benefits of this particular initiative, which is in fulfillment of the African Union 1999 decision, will even yield greater dividends with added benefit of direct flights between African countries, which, believe it or not, here to involve stopovers in the Middle East or Europe. This single air market is coming not long after several African countries agreed to ease visa requirements for African continents. By the time the remaining 32 countries join up, the benefits to African economy will be immense. For us back in Nigeria, particularly in Parliament, in Congress, National Assembly, our legislative agenda has been one focus on the economy. We have worked hard to remove impediments to the value chain, and with some of our efforts, we've seen Nigeria move up 24 places in the World Bank Ease of Doing Business, followed to new laws we've passed in Congress. The Nigerian Senate has introduced an amendment to the procurement law that provides a section that talks about Made in Nigeria initiative. The intention is this to help to stimulate production of goods locally and to get Nigerians to embrace the same. The Public Procurement Amendment Bill makes it compulsory for government agencies to procure products and services from Nigerian manufacturers, if possible, before looking out to foreign supply. This will go a long way in stimulating opportunities for a lot of our young entrepreneurs. The same way we would like to review companies' island matters, laws, and laws to do with access to finance and laws to do with secure transaction bills. These are some of the laws that we have passed in the Senate as to support how we can harness the issue of the local talent. The opportunities, as I said, are huge. And in concluding, I would like to submit that given the complexity of the large range of issues policymakers must tackle to promote better integration into a regional economy, the success of reform agendas will also depend on active dialogue among key stakeholders. Such policy dialogue promotes knowledge sharing, peer learning between countries to share good practices and increase policy impact. Key stakeholders here, I also mean my audience here. It is because it is my view that it is by dialogue and better understanding of the opportunities that we can truly grow the continent. Countries advance in their capacity to design and implement policies through trial and error and learning from the experience of others in an important enhancer of policy learning processes within the countries. Harnessing the opportunity that comes with participating in regional production networks can accelerate African economic transformation, particularly through the gains associated with enhanced productivity, skill development, and diversification of export. However, the gains from regional value chain and GVC participation are not automatic. Opportunity only means what is possible and not what will happen. These will require a broad set of policies, particular focus on trade facilitation, investment, infrastructure, and access to finance. Beyond this, it will require a critical mass of political leaders in the continent with capacity to think globally, act locally, and understand what it truly means to be a leader on the African continent in the age of globalization. Distinguished guests, let me end up and say this. The continent is yearning for leadership, not only in governance. It's also yearning for leadership in the area of commerce, in the area of entrepreneurship. Local talent is yearning for partnership and collaboration. And it is talented, capable, bright people like yourself that hold the fortune of Africa going forward. It is my hope that after listening, that we will continue to see that the future over the next few years ahead of us is for us to harness this local talent that needs to be properly guided. I thank you for this great opportunity. I thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you had a really found it as intriguing as I did, listening to His Excellency speak. Next we're going to be moving to the Capital panel to try to catch up on a little bit of time that we lost. So I'd like to welcome the panelists for the Capital panel. Can you come on now?
No, just take two and then two. Yeah.
Can you start with your name and where you're from?
I'm a senior economist here at the North Research Fellow. So,
okay, I'm chartered accountant.
I'm from Kwara State. So you're very good, nice. I'm actually very happy to be here too. This is the first time I'm listening to you talk, and I'm really happy to hear about all this. So I have a lot of questions. in terms of the commercial and small scale farms, right, I understand the need for commercial farming in the country and how it drives the other sectors and the importance of that. But there's also the importance of the small scale farms. Right? So they also need to be encouraged in some form. So in Zimbabwe, for instance, there are cases of contract farming that exist, that farmers come together in the form of irrigation groups where they come together and they have a contract with a company where something that they can sell their products to. There are issues of warehousing and all that in place. I just want to know what exists in Nigeria in terms of that, especially warehousing and irrigation aspect.
Okay. All right. Let me take the second question first. I'll go to. You see, part of governance is to have a conviction on what you think and what you know is right. It might not be popular, but with time, you find out that they get it right. People will find out. What I mean? The world is seen as a business. It has to be seen as a business. Now, the small farmer will still be taken care of. And I give you the example. For example, when we started dairy farming in Kwara, where you had the milk processing, how many cows did the Zimbabwe farmers have? They didn't have enough. So what did they used to do? They now convince the small herdsmen who are 3 or 4 and 10. They will bring their cows in the morning. They get connected to be milked, and then they pay them. So there was still some kind of contract farming. But the point was that it is better for you to be private sector initiative, private sector driven. It makes them more productive, more efficient. And that's really the model that is going to work. Even your rice production, a Dangote alone cannot produce all the rice, all the paddy rice. He needs small-scale farmers that will do a little bit here, a little bit there. But because he's the one that's going to buy from you, he's going to make sure that he ensures that you become more efficient. If you're doing 2 tons per hectare, he's going to give you the necessary requisite for you to go to 7 and 8 tons. Now, because that's going to make his business viable. So the point I'm making is that, yes, the small-scale farmers are already benefiting from this scheme. Because even if you talk about irrigation in Zimbabwe, it must have come about by the fact that people know that, okay, as a small-scale farmer, when I produce, if you don't have a big farmer collect, big commercial good run, who's going to finance you? Okay, fine. You produce your paddy rice. What next? Your paddy rice does not value. Or you produce your tomato. What next? But if you're going to produce your tomato, because Dangote tomato, I'm going to pick that tomato to process it into tomato puree, then it is viable for a bank to now set up irrigation for you, because I can see where that product. The institutions, the mechanisms by which those processes of crime are utilized are just not available. In our system today, a civil servant can go and buy a house worth 200, 300 million. You ask, where the hell do you find 200 million? Or you go to a bank and deposit 200 and 300 million. Where? The institution and the laws that we want to pass, we're saying, look, let us strengthen, make it, it's almost impossible. If you have, there are 2 areas, just land registry and the banking industry. Let us hold the financial institution accountable. Leave all the civil servants, leave the councillor, that's not your business. Go to the point of where those processes can go to. And create an institution where it makes those impossible. If you do that, I promise you, you will shut down by at least 70% of opportunities. You first shut down the possibilities. So now I'm sitting in my office. There's nothing I'm going to do. If you bring a Japanese man to Nigeria, he will be corrupt. Because the system is there. If you take a Nigerian to Japan, he will not be corrupt. Because where is he going to do it? But unfortunately, we have brought politics into the fight against corruption. You see cases, people just You put it on the paper, after that they don't even follow up. They're not interested in whether there are convictions or there are no convictions. Some are now properly investigated because that is... So the point is, there must be fixed sanctions. Now, after going through all that, and you still do, then there must be still sanctions. But let me tell you, once you corrupt the process of the fight against corruption, you have a problem. Once you corrupt the process, once I'm not sure anymore that this chap is corruption or is politics, you ruin the whole process. And these are some of the fundamental issues that need to be done. So, one area I think is key, which we've tried to make corruption, right? Let us strengthen institutions. Let us make it almost impossible. Right? Look at NNPC. This is what produces 90% of your revenue. You leave NNPC alone. I think in the history of NNPC, only one man in the entire history of NNPC has ever been charged for any corruption. And this accounts for 90%. Then you go to a councillor in a local government somewhere whose percentage of your revenue is probably 0.0003%. So you can see the mismatch. If you spend all your corruption just at NNPC, because that's where the money flows out. Whatever goes to states, goes to local government, comes from NNPC, because that's where your revenues are. If you oversight that, you will see, but unfortunately you can't. Let's see what happened in the last government in the National Security Advice, where a lot of money was being spent. Now, the only people who can do this, unfortunately, are either the anti-corruption institutions or Parliament. But Parliament as an institution is still not strong enough. It's still weak. And this is, I keep on saying to people, I said, the difference between dictatorship and democracy is Parliament. To strengthen Parliament doesn't mean you are strengthening monarchy. No. We will come and go. Just now we're talking about the U.S. Congress here. Even despite how tough Trump is, you can see that it is Congress at the end of the day that he has to engage. It doesn't happen like that. So, to me, I believe that there are a number of things that need to be done. I think we need to be smart about how we fight corruption. Because corruption, if you fight it based on individualism, it cannot work. Because they know that individuals will come and go. Corrupt people will just wait. Is it 4 years? 8 years? 5 years you go. But you strengthen the institutions, and you said, then you fight. So that's I'll come and take your comment. Let me just quickly talk about those who want to come to Nigeria, because that's really what I'm doing. I think when you say, as government, some of the things we're doing, as I said, we're past certain laws and just to use business. For example, a lot of people have noticed now it's much easier now. You can get a visa at the point of entry. We try to make it easier for people who are coming to do business to do that. Registration of companies, and that's why you've noticed that we've moved up about 20 places in ease of doing business. So what we're trying to do is create an enabling environment and remove all the bottlenecks, all the administrative bottlenecks that will enable you. We've created a lot of laws now to aid finance. For example, security transaction, that is, a lot of young people don't have assets. I mean, landed property. You mean you go to bank and you say, I want to start up, say, go and bring land in Abuja. If you say, if I had land, I'd be here. If I had land. You know, what you traded is a movable asset. So now we have now passed into law that will enable you to be able to use that as security. And that's what a lot of the younger people. So there are some of these opportunities that we're doing to try and create that environment. It's a long journey. Don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying to a lot of you is that Africa is where to be. And when you talk about Africa, you're lucky you come from a country that where the opportunities are. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I believe, with or without what we come from, whether we get it right, we don't get it right, the country is up. You can see the energy. A lot of young people are dying to make things happen. And it will happen. We want it to happen sooner than later. The country, apart from demographics, the opportunities, the country is going to go places. We are just one slowing it down because we're not saying it the way it should be. But the talent that we have, the ability that we have, and those of you who are here are best positioned. You're the right. We are more exposed. Yeah, I'm going to take two
two things I did in Kwara, and then 2 things now since being Senator. At least 4 case studies to try and give you an overview of what I'm trying to talk about. The first one is what I call the Kwara State Community Health Insurance. Now let me, I don't know, how many people I was going to tell you where Kwara is. I'll drop let me drop some. So, let me also actually, while you're here, let me. So, how many of you are policy students or looking to start a business? I don't know where you all are. You're either put masters or